In terms of Islam versus Mormonism, which is only a comparison that Christians pejoratively make, there is very little similarity between the two, but in terms of the ontology of their texts, as to say, the nature of the text, their author and their relation to the world, and figures and the scope of them, there is, for me to say, in Mormonism, Joseph Smith receives revelation which tells him to go and uncover golden plates which are to be translated in a manner similar to the Enochian scrying of John Dee and Edward Kelly, Crowley and Victor Neuberg and Parsons and Hubbard. The Book of Mormon is records of earlier lost Israelite prophets who fled to the Americas, not his own revelation. And on its own, that is a absurd idea, but moving on. Joseph Smith's own personal revelations are mostly compiled in the book called Doctrine and Covenants, which significantly varies throughout in terms of who is speaking, how it's taken as revelation, and so forth. For instance, sometimes it is God saying something, sometimes Jesus, sometimes Joseph Smith, etc. And also includes some revelations given to others towards the end. For instance, Brigham Young, Joseph Smith Jr., etc. And then you have the differences between the LDS and the RLDS and so forth. Joseph Smith's goal and vision is to restore, hence why it's called the Restoration, the lost church of Jesus, which disappeared. This itself is an evolution of the Protestant views towards the Catholic Church, and namely the concept of the invisible church. So the idea that Jesus founded the true church, and then at some point early on, during the Catholic period, the visible church is a false church, and the real one emerges only when some Protestant reformer comes, like Luther or Calvin or something, which also later became very important to Rosicrucianism. The Golden Dawn, Thelema, with the idea of the secret adepts guiding humanity. Of course, with Rosicrucianism, Golden Dawn, Thelema, also Theosophy with Blavatsky's Mahatmas and stuff, that also fuses with a particular kind of interpretation of the Buddhist Bodhisattva concept, but this concept of a hidden church obviously relates to certain esoteric currents. Joseph Smith, therefore, is there to establish a priesthood and so forth, just like Catholics, Orthodox, and also Judaism to some extent, but there are obvious differences. In Islam, Prophet Muhammad receives the Quran, which is the be-all, end-all of his life and role as prophet. The Quran is the thing, there is no MacGuffin in addition to his revelations. The revelation is the thing itself. And of course, a very unique thing about the role of the Quran in Islam is that, Muslims will memorize entire surahs of the Quran, and they are recited during the daily prayers, the 5 daily prayers, and other additional prayers, the Sunnah and stuff. But the role of the Quran in Islam, from the very foundations, from the very first revelation to the present day, is a central, integral part of all of Muslim life. The Quran operates both on the vertical transcendent axis, being outside time and being experienced also as such by anyone outside the context it was revealed, and the horizontal historical axis being revealed piecemeal. And of course the Quran itself directly states that it's revealed piecemeal. Anyway, where the Book of Mormon is allegedly sacred records, and just like the Bible in terms of its literary form, the Quran is purely just God alone speaking, outlaying everything past, present, and future, and this can't be understated how significant it is in terms of comparing its literary forms, its ontological nature as presented in the text and experienced and lived by the participants of the religion, compared to the religious texts or scriptures of other religions, which differ heavily in terms of all of these factors and other factors as well. Unlike Mormonism, where Joseph Smith takes on a secondary role with Jesus as the centerpiece, Muhammad in Islam is the centerpiece in terms of human figures, also something that can't be understated, given that there's this very pivotal role of the central patriarchs, so Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, particularly in regards to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Well, the role of Moses in Judaism isn't quite the same as the centrality of Jesus and Muhammad respectively, but it's close enough to warrant this comparison for the purposes of this essay. Muhammad is the aspiration, perfect example of prophethood and humankind. In Islam there is the Quran, which is God's speech. Then there is the Sunnah, which is Muhammad's sayings and actions which form the bedrock of how we live and act as Muslims, and also the foundation of which law, aka Sharia, is based on. This also can't be understated enough, because Muhammad is not just a reformer or an apostle in the kind of... So you got the Paulian sense of apostleship, which figures like Mani, Manichaeism and Joseph Smith very firmly kind of situate themselves in, because they're both figures that are lesser in status to Jesus, and their roles are like to reaffirm and establish that centrality of Jesus within their religious teachings, whereas the role of Muhammad is one that's on par with Jesus and is the final prophet and the figure whose life, sayings and everything, in addition to the revelation he receives, is the foundation of all the laws, the ethics, the things that have a very even though there's fluidity, it has a very firm sense of authority informing all of these factors. Islam is very much the highest embodiment one will ever find of the archetypes of the prophet and the book, and this point too is something that is simply just not a subjective opinion. It's you won't find these concepts as fully embodied and fully elaborated or explored within any other of the, not only Abrahamic but just religions in general, as Islam, because you just don't find this. It's not in the Bible, this kind of totality of the expression of these ideas, and then the actual nature of the text of the books of the Bible are obviously nothing compared to the Quran. Continuing on, Mormonism, on the other hand, leans into the mystical elements of a Christian's relationship with the Bible and the questions that arise from the ontology of the books of the Bible and how they came to be. So obviously with this point as well, we have the whole seer stone, this idea of how did this so and so book of the Bible, how was it written? Well, people were peering into seer stones. This taken as an exegetical lens, where you can kind of see how Mormonism with the Book of Mormon kind of has a way of trying to explain the obvious problems with the idea of the books of the Bible, even how they're written, all of this stuff. As well as this, Mormonism does lean in towards the certain fixation on the King James Version of the Bible and literalizes the idea of inspired translation within a mystical and prophetic context. And obviously you've got the KJV only crowd. It is obvious that Islam is organic and primordial in its content and presentation. There is a whiff of divine intimacy that other religions do not have. And in this line, I'm not specifically saying in any mystical terms either. It's like very much like in the source text. It's a direct engagement. It's not an engagement with a narrative story where the things happening are something purely in retrospect, but it's this: pretty much any other religion that I've seen has several degrees of separation between divine directness and what is presented as the core components of the religion, and thus I conclude major differences between Islam and Mormonism, and this list can very much go on ad infinitum.